Hello and welcome to a capsule. That's right, office hours capsule. Apparently some people haven't been hearing me say this enough, so I'll say this again. This is a small section of my office hours live stream, which if you're watching this after the fact, I'll put a link up here if you want to watch the whole thing. That is a live stream I do every Thursday where I sit through and I react to other videos, but mostly we just look at the news, the updates, and the lore of Star Citizen and talk a little bit about all of that kind of stuff. So join us live on Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern to hang out and talk. And if you want to watch the whole thing, including the context, I take questions from the chat, everything, it'll be live on YouTube after the fact. youtube.com/TheAstroPub live. If you're watching this after the fact, hit that subscribe button, the bell icon. Make sure that you like the video as well. If you want to help spread it around, it helps out growing the channel as well. So without further ado, let's take a look at the Squadron 42 July monthly report. But before that, actually, I do need to go a little bit more because this is not a summary. We looked at the list. This is not a summary. You'll probably notice this is a lot longer than a few minutes. The reason why that is because it's not that summaries are bad. Summaries are fine, but I personally believe that if you want to be the most informed about anything, especially video games, you need to be able to read the sources yourself. So I'll have the source linked below for those of you who'd like to have the source for all of the information regarding what I'm talking about. So you can read along if you like to. But I also recognize that some people don't have time to read things, so they need someone to read it to them. So that's what I'm here to do. I'm going to read you exactly what's on there, word for word. I will interject with my own references or context or other things that, even questions or suppositions that I'll have along the way. But I don't know everything. I'm just reading off using the best skill that I have, the best ability that I have for interpretation of some of this stuff. So grab yourself something to drink, get something to eat, put your headphones in, start up that latest work you got to do, and let me go through this Squadron 42 month report for the month of July 2022. All right. I'm not going to go through the beginning because this is all the same thing every time. All right. AI content. Last month, AI content dedicated time to bug fixing existing features. We identified the top 20 usables that AI interact with and set out to fix as many of the issues as possible in 2 weeks. The issues were triaged and arranged into 3 categories: bugs that the AI designers could solve, bugs that the AI animators could solve, and code issues not solvable by AI content. By the end, approximately 50 issues had been solved before the team returned to feature work. July's feature work included supporting the weapons vendor, setting up, creating weapon pickup and animations, place animations, progressing with the locomotion polish mentioned in last month, and retargeting overlay animations to the female skeleton. This is important if you watch the latest ISC. I'm going to actually increase the scale of this as well because it looks like it's small. If you watch the latest ISC, you'll know that Jared was doing the ISC from the mocap studio. So a lot of the animation, especially with a lot of the AI work, comes down to mocap, the mocap studio, and the availability of that studio and those actors to mocap scenes that they need to kind of pick they need to do pickup work for. And smoothing out animations can help if you have more references or more data tracks. Or more data points you can use for this. That might increase or speed up some of this development as well. Once it gets fully online, which could take months. Though I think they said they want to try to get it all operational by mid-August, so we'll see. The AI designers continued implementing the dynamic conversations feature, expanding it to the eat and drink behavior. Now NPCs have conversations between bites and drinks. We're pleased with the result as it makes the AI feel less individual and more connected with other NPCs. AI contact team. AI engineers will also seek out colleagues at wall panels and work zones, example, broken pipes, to start conversations. They're currently working on implementing chatter for AI in bunk beds and arcade machines too. Very important. I'm going to say this whenever we go over these things. Squadron 42, in fact, I'll do this. Squadron 42 itself is broken up into technically 3 stages that I tend to lump it into 2. CIG categorizes it in 3 stages. You have space combat or space action, foot combat or foot action, where you're on like FPS, and social. Those are the 3 parts of the game. So some of the game, at least a third of the game, is spent walking around ships in a social manner, talking with other people, hearing the banter back and forth, standing in the chow line, preparing your ship, outfitting your ship, outfitting your person, interacting with other crew members, and so on and so forth. 1/3 of your time is going to be flying around, or about 1/3 of your time to be flying around doing space missions. Sometimes that's combat, sometimes it's not. Depends on how you handle things. And the last bit is going to be FPS missions. Now, I say 1/3 because that's how CIG breaks it down. There may be more social missions than there are combat missions, or vice versa. It really depends on how CIG balances it, but generally speaking, that's what we're looking at. So you keep that in mind when I continue to talk about some of this stuff, because a lot of this stuff will be referencing things like AI talking at a vending machine. Why is that important? Because that's part of the social aspect of the game. And that's the big key. And a lot of that stuff will get ported over to Star Citizen eventually, but that stuff is important for Squadron to add a little bit more of that immersion. You can think of a part of Squadron 42 as effectively The Sims in that kind of level of not necessarily that detail, but that kind of context for what you're looking around for. All right, let's look at AI features. AI features. For human combat, AI features continue to work on tactic selection, including implementing a more data-driven approach to setting up the scoring factors in DataForge. This will allow the designers to quickly tweak values to produce the best possible range of combat behaviors for the situation, including with multiple combatants with different setups and ranges. This solution extends the function selection in Subsumption to allow the game code to register a custom probability calculator, which will provide benefits in general, not just for combat behaviors. So if I'm reading this right, they're adding more details to AI to make them more unique. They're giving them probability factors for how they would approach something. So, for instance, if an AI is facing multiple combatants, it will make a calculation of saying, should I back up and get to cover, or should I throw a grenade, or should I hunker into cover, or should I just run out, or should I just drop my gun and run away? That's what it seems like they're adding to that functionality. This custom probability factor, which will provide benefits in general, not just for combat behaviors. So, yeah. They also began aligning the existing perception systems to a new design where the perception meter rises depending on different stimuli, hearing footsteps or gunfire, seeing a target, etc., and falls over time. Once different threshold levels on the meter are hit, they trigger different alertness levels that will determine specific reaction animations and behaviors. For example, at the lowest level, the AI will react by simply turning their head towards the stimulus. At the middle level, they will investigate the stimulus, and at the highest level, they will enter combat. Stimuli can also impact the meter in different ways based on the conditions of the target, including whether they're crouched or standing and in the location's lighting. This is something they've been working on fairly in depth. I think they finished allowing for the AI to be able to hear selectively. They showed off a thing about a year or two ago where they got the AI to, if you're like walking outside a doorway, an AI won't hear you walking outside the doorway or see you walking outside the doorway, so they won't just immediately bust through the door and try to kill you. So now the key is to set up different stages upon which they're doing that. So work also started on the investigation behavior, with the devs implementing a system to allow NPCs to determine potential enemy hiding spots, check them, and keep track of which ones the ones they've seen. The next stage is for NPCs to share information so they can cover a level together. Very cool. For a more stealth-based approach. They're also working to improve consistency of cover selection using automatic cover generation system. They also are planning to improve the quality of cover and provide more information to the AI so that less decision-making has to be made at runtime. They've also blocked out animations for human AI mantling and vaulting to give NPCs more locomotion options when moving around the environment. Cleanup and timing tasks were also completed for the Spec Ops animation sets. For the Van Tool, the team blocked out several animations, including piloting and some location-specific animations, to get the Van Duel from their spawn locations, often off the navigation mesh, on into the level. All right, cool. All right, AI tech. During July, AI tech focused on extending the functionalities required to traverse navigation islands using special action. This included implementing new adapters for navigation links to include mantling, jumping down, and vaulting. The basic idea is that using all the existing markup, we want to allow NPCs to perform similar actions to the player in the environment. For example, we adjusted the ledge objects to include specifications that evaluate the nav mesh and link multiple islands correctly. Allows the AI to be more natural, to do everything that the players can do. They also continued R&D on seamless transitions into usables. This time they implemented a cleaner and more reliable system for sharp turn animations, giving more natural movement to NPCs following paths around corners. This helps NPCs feel heavier and show weight balancing when moving over sharp corners. That's part of the whole tightening up, making a little bit more natural when you move around. Progress was also made on the locomotion refactor. Last month, the team began improving how AI actors process movement, which will allow them to decouple movement from requests from what processes it. This is an important change to better support multiple path followers used in different contexts. For example, actors, creatures, or NPCs driving a vehicle or pushing a trolley. They're currently preparing to integrate into Squadron 42 branch and verify that everything works as expected. It's important change to better support multiple path followers used in different contexts. Okay, so I think what they're saying is if a NPC is walking around, they will use different animations and locomotions than if that NPC is pushing a cart or in a vehicle. And so they're trying to decouple movement requests from what's processed it. So they're removing I think that's the whole removing the NPC's movement from the DGS to a backend service. So you don't have to, the availability of that movement won't be dependent on the services. So for the subsumption editor within the Sandbox tool, AI Tech implemented new functionality and stabilized the tool to finally open up the usage to all the designers. A better AI debug UI using IMGUI is currently being implemented to allow the devs to select and inspect NPC behaviors. The tool can split the NPCs present in each zone, select multiple NPCs and inspect their properties. Okay. Progress was also made on ship reinforcements for Alpha 3.17.1. The team made the feature more robust by adding better monitoring of the disembarking process from the pilot's perspective. They also added an abort phase for the dropship in case the drop location is occupied, and the pilot can now monitor the presence of a player inside the cargo area. They also fixed several bugs relating to slow reaction time and desynced teleports. These issues are mostly caused by a low server frame rate, but the devs optimized the code and implemented tweaks to allow the code to better handle some of those situations. That's, I think, copy-paste directly from the Star Citizen stuff. So, AI vehicles. In July, the AI vehicle team finished enabling AI to use master modes. AI is now fully integrated with the ability to swap master modes when required by the operator mode they want to use. The designers will also soon be able to cycle modes to give AI access to higher SCM speeds when designing behaviors. Bug fixes are also made throughout the month, including an issue with the Fly-2 not computing an efficient path and dive attacks ignoring driverless spaceships. Yeah. AI can use more operator modes, and they get some bugs. All right. Last month, the animation team further developed the zero-G movement and navigation, adjusting the field to give a better overall experience. They also worked on the new SMG, additional weapons for the Master at Arms, ladder interactions, female console use, and locomotion, sharp turns and jukes. The new Mobiglass interactions were developed to give more realistic feel to characters, and progress was made on the Van Duel, this time searching vents and climbing. Oh. On the facial side, improvements to the facial animations of the named cast members continued. Very cool. Not the best interactions, okay. Art characters. The character team spent June focusing on the remaining Navy faction outfits, I think they meant July, and progressed with the Screaming Galson's armor. They're currently preparing to create the Shubin mining outfits and work with tech animation on head scans for various characters. Okay, nice. Art weapons. Weapon art started this month bug fixing, closing out around half of their backlog of bugs alongside cleanup work. Progress was then made on Volt, shotgun, pistol, assault rifle, and sniper rifle. Animation work progressed on the Volt weapons too. The first pass animations and reviews of the new melee metrics were completed. Work also began on some Squadron 42 faction-specific weapons, beginning with an SMG and shotgun. The military multi-tool had its white box updated with new screen positions to ensure UI work for the intended gameplay too. Okay, that's interesting. SMG and a shotgun for Squad 42 only. And a multi-tool for military only. Huh. Engine. All right. I am not a tech priest. I am not a Starfleet engineer. I am not a floating ball of goo that the Forerunners created to disassemble and reassemble things. I cannot turn rocks into replicators. And I do not know the echoes of the machine spirit. I am simply a teacher. And I do not know the engine code of Star Citizen. So I'm going to read this because it's important to read through it. But as I always say, let me know in the comments below if you understand what I'm saying and can translate it for me, at least a little bit. I think a lot of people would take to heart any of this improvements. Generally speaking, engine is almost always a copy paste from the Star Citizen Star Citizen monthly report because they're the same engine, same games practically. And I can note, generally speaking, before we get started, that it's mostly optimizations and some improvements to Gen 12, but there are some other things in there as well. All right, let's get started. Engine. In July, the physics team made several optimizations to the code. Ray/box overlaps checks were implemented in ISPC, and are now also used in Ray world intersections, RWI, to quickly skip entry parts if there is no overlap of a ray and an entity's local bounds. Further optimizations include using a box pruner to process vehicle wheels and all their possible colliders and their parts more quickly, as well as SSE and AVX2 optimizations in the code that searches parts of a physical entity. Additionally, support for a successive pulley attachments to rope entities was added, and the spatial configuration of interior grid types was changed to use more layers of internal nodes that are smaller in dimension. This, for instance, helped in Port Olisar, where a lot of time was spent maintaining thunk lists, which is completely removed by this change. A couple things we can pull from that. Optimizations, and more support for ropes and pulleys. I've said for many time that the rope system seems to be in place, and it seems people say, oh, for climbing or other things. I think it's for rope puzzles for Squadron. I think it's its original purpose. I think CIG will find a way of using rope eventually for something else, but I think it's originally for Squadron is what it's being developed for. And this also mentions Port Olisar, because Port Olisar, I think, this is them trying to keep Port Olisar around as much as possible because they don't want to get rid of it. So, and for those who are wondering, why is Port Olisar in Squadron 42 report? Because the engine is just a copy paste of everything from Star Citizen. Squadron, it goes into the Squadron 42. I don't think there's anything that is engine related that is specifically Squadron 42. And a lot of this stuff is actually copy pasted. A lot of this stuff is stuff that's already in Squadron or in Star Citizen's monthly report, but they add additional stuff if there's Squadron information. So, all right. On the renderer, the Gen 12 transitions continued. For example, Gen 12 Scaleform UI rendering was enabled by default. Support for MIP map generation passes was added, and material overrides for render nodes are now supported, including the multi-materials. The depth prepass submission is now skipped if motion vectors are rendered. Thread synchronization code is pipeline state object, PSO, cache refreshing, as well as the shader system was improved. And unnecessary stencil tests for the shadow map stage were removed. The render loading thread was replaced by a video rendering thread, which is needed for the sole purpose of rendering UI while the game is loading. Lastly, a bug that was crashing the video driver was fixed, and the entire render code was changed to successfully compile via include what you use, IWYU. Various issues in the form of buffer overruns in low-level VFX render code were also fixed. So moving things to the UI to Gen 12 and a bunch of other things to help fix with the UI issues. Gen 12 ports of atmospheric and volumetric cloud rendering continued to look up table generation for atmosphere as well as volumetric cloud pre-processing steps were successfully moved over to the execute through the new APIs. The rendering of legacy spherical clouds was moved to Gen 12.2 and can now also render as part of the deferred pipelines forward stage, which will be enabled soon. This recent progress also resulted in various suggestions, some of which have already been implemented to refine the Gen 12 APIs for special cases, so they can be ported straightforwardly and integrate better. Lastly, work on porting the remaining passes for atmospheric and volumetric clouds will commence in August. I don't remember that being in Star Citizen stuff, that it might be. That's a good sign. It means that that's Gen 12 being worked on for its interaction with API, with other stuff, so. On the core engine, entity lifetime code was adjusted for the new needs of server meshing, with the goal of it being easier to use, as well as creating a more refined feeling of persistence. Again, this is a little bit different, a little trickier. For those who go, well, yeah, this is a copy paste from Star Citizen. That's why they have server meshing. Squadron 42 uses server meshing. I am not kidding. It uses server meshing. No, Squadron 42 is not an always online game. The way that it functions, as last we heard, is that Squadron 42 uses the same architecture as Star Citizen. Meaning, when you start up a game of Squadron 42, your computer will create a server on your computer, and then you will populate that server with your client on that computer. So it's effectively running two instances of the game on your computer, which, again, sounds really resource intensive, which is why they're doing server meshing, so that they can break up those sections into smaller servers, so you don't have to have a lot of entities in those regions. So this isn't unique to Star Citizen. Other games do that as well. Not to the level that Squad 42 is doing, but it's not an unheard way of cheating the system, especially in a single player game. And it's mostly there to save on resources. This is what it's designed for. And also not to double the work. Because if they had to build a brand new system to work with single player experience and how it loads and unloads assets, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Just use the system you already have. All right, on the core engine, entity lifetime code was adjusted for the new needs of server meshing, with the goal of it being easier to use as well as creating more refined feeling persistence. A time slice entity density manager was implemented as a part of the reworked entity lifeline for server meshing. The background job manager was changed to better cope with the very long-running preempted background jobs to reduce runtime stalls. For example, stalls during shader compilation. Furthermore, component lifetime now uses a cheaper custom weak pointer approach that the current STD shared underscore PTR cannot provide. Moreover, star hash bind culling of subzones was significantly optimized. The ability to set hardware, data, breakpoints from code was fixed. And lastly, Linux thread priority changed to use real-time FIFO scheduling. Features. Gameplay. Gameplay features focused on support and new bug fixing throughout July, specifically looking into performance and polishing recently worked on features. New functionality was also added to player choice. This feature now utilizes the same setup used for conversations and allows design and change whether the text is camera facing along with its size and offset. That's weird. Specifically looking into performance and polishing recently worked on features. Okay. New functionality was also added to player choice. This feature will utilize the same setup for use for conversations and allows design to change whether the text is camera facing along with its size. Okay. So it's working on the decisions that players are making in the game. Yeah, that makes sense. Features. Vehicle. Vehicle features started designing the new multifunction displays alongside the core engineering technology work in the background. The design side is mostly complete, with a focus now on prototypes. The team also spent time integrating new resource network that will deliver more interesting and varied engineering gameplay. This will also increase performance as items are used more efficiently. That's a lot more information on engineering gameplay than we got in the Squadron 4 and the Star Citizen monthly report. This, I think, almost but confirms that engineering gameplay is going to be a thing in Squadron 42. And the MFDs are being worked on. Like I've said before, a lot of stuff that's being worked on in Squadron 42 is going to come over to Star Citizen, but it's being worked on in Squadron first, so it's done first in Squadron. Quantum Boost, hello Quantum Boost, was fully integrated into Squadron 42 and handed over to the designers to enable them through feedback on further level design requirements. Finally, on the tech side, the team continued to support persistent streaming with a transit refactor alongside bug fixing. So, Quantum Boost is this thing that they've been teasing for like almost a year now. It's been mentioned multiple times in multiple different monthly reports, but they've never expounded upon what the heck is Quantum Boost. There's a couple of theories out there, but CIG hasn't said anything. And the reason why is likely because they don't fully know yet. They don't even know if Quantum Boost is going to work. And to give an example of something similar, they were going to be using not subsumption. PES was using a different process. Persistent entity streaming was something different before it became PES. And that system, they thought they were going to use it, and then they completely realized it wasn't going to work, so they abandoned it and started to work on PES, which then didn't work. iCache, that's what it was. So it was iCache, because the iCache is a system, a way of, I guess, storing information. I don't know 100% on iCache, but I know it's very different from persistent entity streaming. They thought they were going to use iCache, they decided that's not going to work, and they moved it to PES. So Quantum Boost, I'm guessing the reason why they haven't told us yet is because they don't fully understand how it's going to look like in its final form. So they're very hesitant to let players know anything about stuff like that until it's in more complete fashion. But it still says, what the heck is Quantum Boost? I don't know. I've heard theories that it helps speed up travel time. I've heard it helps with the combat, so you have to actually boost in order to get into quantum, so that it makes people more vulnerable while traveling, rather than being able to hit shift and fly away and then quantum somewhere else. I don't know. Missiles received a complete flight retune after some bug fixing, highlighting problems with the way missiles were set up. Now focuses on the intercept portion of flight and controlling accelerations rather than allowing them to be controlled as dynamically as they were before. Controlling missiles? Okay, that's what I was reading. The team also began balancing what speeds and tunings are required for the new Master Modes feature, ensuring they get the combat speeds right under normal thrust and boost, so combat starts to move in the intended direction. There's that reference. They've talked about that in the past as well in some forum posts and Spectrum posts about how they want to slow down combat speeds in Star Citizen, so obviously they're testing it with Squadron first. To help with feature ship balance and the introduction of Resource Network, the team created a master tuning document that will not only act as a reference point for future ship designs, but allow them to set out the requirements of the Resource Network balance once it's handed to design. So, engineering gameplay, quantum boost, missiles refactor, master modes feature, speeds and tunings. There's lots of interesting things here. Gameplay story. Gameplay story received a fresh delivery of motion capture in early in July, which allowed them to make great strides in several different areas, including creating a whole new scene in Chapter 1 and updating the start of another. They also made a significant update in the scenes in Chapter 4G, overhaul the scene in Chapter 4, and further polish scenes in Chapter 4. Maintenance was also performed across various scenes in several different chapters. The team also looked at the later chapters and began prototyping 2 new scenes in Chapter 10 and made some minor updates to Chapter 12. Okay, pretty good. A lot of updates to the story. Graphics and VFX Programming. July saw the implementation of a dynamic bitset data structure, which replaces the T-joint bitset, as well as the investigation and testing of offline damage maps with persistence. The team also worked on separating CPU and GPU implementation, ensuring they result in the same damage map. Okay, that's for damages, new damage maps for things like salvage and such. The team finished porting gas clouds to Gen 12 and fixed several issues, including a GPU crash related to this feature. Work began on Vulkan scaleform functionality and particle mesh rendering in Gen 12. Progress was also made on porting refraction and light beams to Gen 12. Canvas decal texture streaming was sped up, and image testing now waits for it to complete. Support for silhouettes on editor entity objects was added alongside improvements to render item sorting to make it consistent at different runs. Hair color and specular improvements were finished for the hair shader. There were also updates to tessellation and displacement on the organic shader. For jump points, the team focused on branching tunnels, which include fixing situations where the connecting segments self-intersect. Planetech team made the improvements to the world and biome builder by moving mesh building to background jobs, substantially reducing shutters in editor. There were also fixes for mismatching physics meshes on servers, as well as a refactor of procedural entities, which improved the planet loading time. 4-point Bezier curves were also added to river generation alongside general improvements to river placement tool. Collision detection was added to Rastar to prevent modules from being placed where they could overlap with Geometry 2. Narrative. During July, narratives focus on completing first-pass scripting and recording scratch dialogue for a large section of one of Squadron 42's middle chapters. Designed refined the gameplay in this section, so narrative frequently played through these updated enemy encounters, puzzles, stealth, and navigation challenges. It's very important to make sure the player always understands that their current goals are and what their next steps should be. So, to that end, the writers have been working to balance dialogue hints to ensure that players who need a bit more guidance will be able to get it without spoiling the fun or challenge of a given area. Narrative team. Additionally, as gameplay mechanics were iterated on and polished, the narrative team adjusted the script to ensure that lines referencing those mechanics matched how the gameplay worked. For example, recent improvements to the radar and scanning system allowed for them to streamline some of the terminology used by characters in game. Okay. The team also looked to expand the use of dynamic conversation system to enhance the background and enemy NPCs that players will come across. While important key conversations are specifically planned for the player to encounter, there are some areas where the player's freedom to explore has highlighted the need for additional content to bring it to life. Rather than relying on additional bespoke lines, the team is investigating using dynamic conversations to allow for a much broader range of content to fill space. Okay, it's something we talked about before, so. Tech animation. The tech animation team continued to invest time into the tool's codebase. Years of development and quick fixes are being triaged, consolidated, and revamped to fully conform to their coding standards and modularize the codebase to be more accessible to the technical animators. This will expedite the creation of tools to the pipeline that rely on core processes. Alongside this, they're currently developing and integrating several new tool chains, CGA and skin loading in Maya, RBF solver development, and SSD and Alembic animation pipeline support. Their future development roadmap is also in planning. Tech Animations helps them build tools and stuff like that. UI. Last month, the UI team continued to develop its new Starmap, mentioned at the very beginning, improving labeling and concepting how to display space clouds in a way that looks great and performs well. The artists then worked on game design with game designers to create concepts for several interactive UI screens found around the game. The team also worked on new doors and airlocks specifically for Squadron 42, building them to look right in various UI styles and setting them up to support a variety of gameplay scenarios. Starmap. Lastly, VFX. Throughout July, VFX team continued to work closely with art and design, supporting all visual effects requirements for their Q3 milestones. They also spent a lot of time cleaning up, documenting one of their most crucial pipelines, rigid body destruction. The majority of Squadron 42's destruction sequences are created in Houdini, then exported to the engine. The visual requirements of the sequence determine the way it's exported, with two file formats available: CGA for animated geometry transforms, example, building pieces breaking apart, and Alembic for animated geometry deformation, for example, bending metal. So it's important that the pipeline is robust enough to handle varying complexity of the destruction sequences without slowing the artists down. And that's it. So we don't see a lot of updates from Squadron. We're seeing a lot of July had a lot of polish, a lot of going back and fixing bug fixes and such. Obviously, the big thing, seeing the improving ship destruction and other things, the damage maps, new star map, and new Squadron 42 specific assets, including, said airlocks, doors, weapons. Other than that, we're seeing some narrative stuff. A lot of work on Chapter 1, Chapter 4, and Chapter 12. The big things were missiles updates, quantum boosts, resource gameplay, engineering gameplay. So very, very interesting kind of additions there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Most of it is stuff that's either fixing. There's some new things, like they're adding new Navy outfits and the Screaming Galson's Army, which they're constantly working on, and new Shubin mining assets. Mostly, it's fairly similar to what we've seen before for Squadron 42 and for Star Citizen. So a little bit lighter month in terms of content, but a lot of polishing that's being done. It's the same thing with Star Citizen. So as always, I'd like to know your thoughts. I do these every month. I go through every single Squadron 42 and Star Citizen monthly report, read them word for word for you, and I, as always, do not know if this is good or not. So tell me down below, do you still find these useful? Do you find them helpful? Would you like me to add or change anything to this? Those things are helpful for me going forward. Make sure to let me know in the comments below. And as always, remember, Ex Historia. Oh, no, that's a different. That's the Astro Historian, which you should also be subscribed to. But as always, remember, hope to see you someday in the black.